Great to see Clay's enthusiasm there, but we always like to see a new bird on our patch. Well, that comes to mind when we think about ourselves as a nation and our love for birds. In fact, we call ourselves a nation of animal lovers. And one of the ways we might measure that is in the way that we feed our birds. And we've certainly been feeding the birds on our watches for the last X years. Here are some of the feeders we've had out. Classic peanut feeder there. Sunflower seeds as well. And we put them up so that we can get cracking views of the birds, also see what's there as soon as we arrive. We can put them up. In fact, though, we are not alone, because when it comes to feeding birds in the UK, we really take it seriously. 64% of all households feed the birds. That's 17 million homes. And get this, we spend £250 million collectively on no less than 150,000 tonnes of bird food every single year. That's a lot of bird food. Now, if we think about that spread between the 10 species which are the most frequent visitors to our feeders, that means that we don't just provide enough food for them if they didn't eat anything else for an entire year. In fact, for each individual of those 10 species, we feed 3 times the amount of food that they would need to eat to get through the year. That's a colossal amount of food. And quite clearly, this is going to have an impact on the ecology and the behaviour of these birds. And recently, we've become increasingly concerned that it might have a negative impact. To discuss this with me is Jack Badhams. Jack, thanks for coming along. So let's get down to the potential negatives, the first of which is disease.
Absolutely. So disease is something that people who feed the birds are going to be very familiar with. It's talked about quite a lot. But this is driven by the fact that bird feeders are actually incredibly artificial. They're incredibly unnatural, and there isn't anything in nature where multiple different birds, potentially hundreds of different birds, are all being forced into tiny little areas to get their food, an unlimited supply of food, over and over again for potentially weeks, months, or even years at a time. And that creates an environment that's perfect for spreading some diseases.
And some of the species that have suffered are our finches. Now, I've got to tell you, the figures are quite staggering. We know that avian trichomoniasis has spread from pigeons to wild finches via the bird feeders. It was first reported in 2005. And get this, there's been a 66% decline in greenfinches in the past 10 years. 3 million greenfinches have died. And more recently, chaffinches have dropped by 30% and bullfinches have declined by nearly 40% in the last 5 years. So disease transmission amongst these birds is very, very serious. And of course, it's not just trichomoniasis. We've had avian flu.
Yeah, avian pox as well.
Avian pox as well.
And we've said it's great if you clean your bird feeders. Of course it is. Everyone should be cleaning their bird feeders. But the fact is that enough? If you hang that bird feeder back up and a diseased bird lands on it within 5 minutes, that risk is there again.
That risk is there, but we've got to quantify this and we've got to qualify it. And that's why we need some good science. I'm very pleased to say that the RSPB have invested in that good science and they're preparing their report, which they're going to release in the spring. And of course, that's going to be very eagerly anticipated. But look, it's not just disease, is it? There are other factors.
There is. So this next one is one that's gaining traction within sort of conservation thinking. And this comes down to the amount of bird food you referenced there. We feed the birds, but are we feeding all birds equally? Do all of them benefit? So we know that we've certainly helped some populations of birds. Birds like greater spotted woodpecker, and particularly birds like blue tit and great tit, have done very, very well out of the bird food that we've put out. But could that potentially have a negative impact? Let's take some of our rarer species, because if the populations of birds like blue tits and great tits spill out into woodlands, into good remnants of habitats, then birds like these pied flycatchers, birds like these willow tits. Pied flycatchers, of course, don't benefit from bird feeders. Willow tits like to stay in one territory more or less their entire lives, and they won't travel to find feeders in the same way that blue tits and great tits will. Species like lesser spotted woodpeckers, well, their nests are predated a lot by greater spotted woodpeckers. So the question is, if we artificially inflate populations of some of these more aggressive generalist species like blue tits and great tits, as they spill out into natural habitats, could it have a negative effect on some of the birds that really do need our help?
And there is some evidence that's certainly the case when it comes to more fragile species that are in critical decline, like the willow tit. But OK, that's the birds. What about the human impact? Because let's be fair, a lot of people connect with nature. People living in the hearts of cities and in urban areas, they connect with nature through their feeders. They enjoy seeing the birds through the kitchen and the lounge window. Also, we know that it pays dividends in terms of people's mental health.
Absolutely.
So there are other factors involved, but ultimately we've got to make a decision. Now, I've got to say at the moment, my feeders are still up. I am cleaning them regularly. And in the past, when we've seen sick or dead birds in the garden, we've taken them down for a couple of months. But you've taken a different route.
I have, yeah. This has been racking my brain around this for the last few years. And for me, I've decided that I've had to take my feeders down.
Feeders are down. Now, look, one thing we should say straight away, don't fear for all of the birds that you were previously feeding in your garden, because, again, good scientific research has been conducted in the United States looking at chickadees, like tits. And what they found was that when they were on the feeders, they were only taking 50% of the food that they required. The other 50% was natural. And when those feeders were taken down, they very rapidly adapted, going back to a natural diet. So no starving birds out there if you take your feeders down.
And I think it's important to remember that these birds have evolved over thousands of years to follow food that is very transient. It's a relatively recent thing that we've had these never-ending supplies of food in our feeders. So naturally, they will roam around and look for other food sources.
And there are alternatives.
There are, yes. So me personally, in my garden, I might have taken the feeders down, but I've not stopped providing for the birds. For me, it's all about building an ecosystem and not just a fast food restaurant. Thinking about what sort of plants we can provide to build that ecosystem from the bottom up that can provide homes for insects for the birds to eat and natural sources of food, seed heads, berries, fruits, nuts, things like that.
Yeah, well, we put together a little collection that you can see here. We're not suggesting that you do this in the garden. This is merely to demonstrate the point. And what you can see there are some sunflower heads. You can plant sunflowers in your garden, even in a window box. Leave the ivy if you've got it, because the berries on that are very important. Teasels there, as you can see, magnet for finches, undoubtedly. So there are a whole range of things that we can put into our garden like that. And of course, the key thing is that's not just about attracting birds. If you plant things like, you're going to attract lots of insects, the pollinators, the caterpillars that are going to eat those. I mean, mammals will come as well. Here we've seen red squirrel nibbling on those sunflower seeds. But also, Jack, earlier this week I heard a report about a study that's been done on hedgehogs and found a larger number of hedgehogs in gardens when they were feeders, perhaps scavenging underneath that feeder as well. So it's quite a complex thing.
It's a really complex thing. It's a really nuanced thing. But I think I'd love us to get to a place where our first thought when it comes to helping the birds is not what bird feeder can I buy, not what food can I buy, but what native bush could I plant, what flowers could I grow, what natural sources could I produce. Can I tell you my favourite bird I've had in my garden? My favourite bird on my garden list.
Go on.
So I let a part of my lawn grow long, and I stood washing the pots, and I was looking out the window, and I saw the ragwort trembling as a bird
you're
was
teasing
hopping
this
through.
one in. Go on.
What popped out? Common whitethroat.
That's
Now,
a good garden bird.
for me,
I've
got a pretty average-sized garden. That was a great garden bird. And no amount of food that I could have gone to a garden centre and bought and put out would have fed that bird.
way.
It was there because I'd built the ecosystem, there were aphids there, and it was feeding on those, and that just gave me so much joy.
I bet it did. That's a top bird for the garden. But look, let's be clear. We are not telling you what to do here. What we're trying to do is present you with some information to start a conversation so that you can think about how you want to address this issue. And of course, we'll be constantly updating that as more science comes in. But let's also be very clear, feeding birds in the UK, as I said with those figures at the start, is a cultural institution. It's also big money. There were economics here. There were companies out there selling bird food with their employees. And we've also got to be clear that the whole thing is more complex. Not all of these birds are declining simply because of bird feeding. We know that the biggest driver of biodiversity loss in the UK for all of these species and many more is intensive agriculture and forestry. So we need to address that too. And then there's the thorny issue of cats. We know that they take 55 million birds a year. So it's a complex thing. What we'd like you to do is just think about it. Well, one thing's for sure, and you pointed it out, is that we've got to change. If we want to continue to live in a world which is rich and full of the things that we as a nation love, we've got to change our habits. So please think about that and have that conversation. Now, I think we might have a thermal, if we've got a little raw